So I just posted to the chat a link to the Safaria version. That's the Rambam as translated by Ibn Tibbon. So if you're looking there, you want to go to part 1, chapter 3. That's where we're up to. And today, I plan on doing chapter 3, 4, and 5. So I might move a little faster than usual, but the point is to get to chapter 5, and you'll understand why in a moment. For starters, I'm not going to promise to do this every week, but I'm going to try. And last week, you might remember, I introduced I mentioned a scholarly article that were related to topics that we had discussed. And I'll refer to another one. And some people were interested. And again, this time, if you're interested, I can send you copies. Just text me offline and I'll send you a copy of the article. This one is by a professor in, please forgive me, I don't know how to pronounce French very well, but it's Sorbonne, Sorbonne, that university in France. Anyway, his name is David Lemler, and he wrote this article called "The Skeptical Exegesis of Maimonides," where he discusses the issue of how Maimonides interprets parables, which we are doing now. In other words, and he differentiates between Maimonides' interpretation, halachic interpretations, the Jewish law interpretations. Give me 1 second. My computer's not plugged in and I have to plug it in. Hold on 1 second. All right, it almost went dead on us. So and how in Maimonides, in his writings on law, he typically tried to drive at one simple meaning, one basic law, and that's the rule. Whereas when it came to agadic interpretations, agadic meaning issues not of law but of philosophical ideas, he would interpret in ways that we are studying together today, not literally according to the way the text is. Now, hold on 1 second. I'm going to mute everyone. And if you would like to say something, just raise your hand and feel free to unmute yourself. And this article also mentions, and this is important, that Maimonides clearly understood and realized that his interpretations of these verses aren't necessarily authoritative, and that in future times, other people might come with other interpretations that make more sense or might be better than his. So if anyone's interested in seeing this article, because these are points that I've been making all along, and I want you to see that I'm not just saying myself, there's a lot of important Maimonidean scholars that sit in various university chairs that agree with me, and they have all the degrees to back themselves up. So anyway, now that we said that, I would like to make 1 or 2 points. The first main point is, in my title of today's lecture, I said, how does a rationalist see God? So I want to make 1 point, and then I'm going to show you how Maimonides develops this point. And that point is that many of us have this idea of a religious person. I see God, I feel God. You can draw pictures from your own experiences from other people. I know I get Facebook posts on like a regular basis from people that consider themselves religious about how they experience God, they feel God, and everything's gonna be fine today. I'm gonna be healthy. I'm gonna get all the money I need, and all my kids are gonna be happy, and all my friendships are gonna be good. I'm gonna get that new job, and God is gonna help. God is this, and I see God, I feel God, all these things like that. In Maimonides' world, and I want you to, in his philosophy, and to keep this in mind as we read through what we're going to learn today, in Maimonides, whenever a person seeks God through the prism of his or her physical needs and physical pleasures and physical desires, that will lead to nowhere. And whatever experience of God, and I put God in quotation marks, the person has, when it's motivated by selfish desires and selfish needs, even if they're legitimate selfish desires and legitimate selfish needs, is not going to lead to anything true. It's going to lead to what you want to see, what you want to feel, but it's not going to lead to anything about God. Now, bear this in mind, and keep that in mind as we approach the topic that the Rambam is going to talk about. Now, I'm going to read to you a whole bunch of verses from the Torah, which many of you will be familiar with. You know, some of you might not be, but verses which, throughout the time that you've spent in your lives, to the extent that you have spent time thinking about verses in the Torah, you probably wondered what these things mean, especially if you are like me and have a rationalist sort of general life philosophy. You wondered what it's talking about. And these are things which can contradict almost what we would imagine Rambam would say and how we would interpret things. So I'm going to start with the famous story in the book of Exodus, chapter 3, of Moses and the burning bush. So Moshe comes in front of a burning bush, right? You know, I'm not going to go into all the details of the story. And it says in chapter 3, verse 2, Vayira malach Adonai Elav, and the angel of God, or the appearance of God's angel, appeared to him, Bilabat Eish, in flames of fire, mitoch hasneh, from within the bush. Vayar, and he saw, v'hinei hasneh bo'er bo'esh, this bush was burning in flames, v'hasneh einenu ukal, but the bush was not being consumed by the flames. Vayomer Moshe, and Moses said, Asura na, I am going to go ve'ereh, and I want to see at hamareha gadol hazeh, this incredible appearance. Madua lo yivar hasneh, why is this bush not burning from that flame? So Vayar Adonai kisar lerot, God saw that he went to look. Vayikra elav Elohim mitoch hasneh, and God called out to him from within the bush. Vayomer, and he said, Moshe, vayomer hinei. And then I'm going to skip a little. God identifies himself. I am the God of your forefathers, Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. Immediately, as soon as Moses realizes that this is God, it says, Vayaster Moshe panav, Moshe hid his face, ki yorei mehabit el ha'elohim, because he was afraid of looking at, staring at God. Mehabit el ha'elohim, he was afraid of looking. Habit means to look or to stare. So we see Moshe, but remember, this was an image that Moshe was just looking at, right? He saw the burning bush. He went to the burning bush, looked at the burning bush, and then as soon as God identified that this is God speaking, Moshe then all of a sudden covers his face, right? And he won't look because he's afraid to look at God. But he just looked, right? So like, what exactly happened between before and now that all of a sudden he can't look? And what does it mean that he was afraid to look at God? God's not there. There's a bush there. So I mean, there's a lot of questions. I'm going to leave those questions out there for now because we're going to come back to it near the end of the class. I'm going to read through a couple other verses, and some of these verses, if you were a non-rationalist, might be easier to interpret on the surface, right? Once God started talking, it became a fearsome thing, and you can't look at God. But us rationalists, according to Maimonides, right, God doesn't appear as anything. So what does that mean even? So let's look at another verse, also in a little bit later in the book of Exodus. And now I'm looking at chapter 19, verse 21. So it says over here that before the revelation at Sinai, it says, Vayomer Adonai Moshe, God says to Moshe, Reid ha'ed ba'am, I want you to go down and warn the people, Pen yersu el Adonai deros, because they might rush towards the mountain to see God. The nafal mimenu rav, and many of them will die because they will see God. V'gam hakohanim hanigoshim el Adonai yiskadashu, and even the priests who generally are okay presenting themselves do come close to God, so to speak, when they serve in the tabernacle. You need to separate them as well, because I'm afraid that God will somehow break out among them and there might be cause death. And what is this talking about? What does it mean that the priests see God? What does it mean that they come close to God? What does it mean that people are going to try to see? What does this mean? How does a rationalist explain that? I'm leaving that question out there, and we're going to let Maimonides do his job. But I have more verses here to bring before I get there. So now I'm continuing in the book of Exodus, and now I'm in Exodus 24. And here we have a very, very weird and curious story. And this is Exodus 24, verses 10 and 11. And it says over here that this is during the time of the inauguration of the tabernacle, the inauguration of the Mishkan. And it says, Vayal Moshe v'Aaron Nadav v'Avihu v'Shivim miziknei Yisrael. And Moses and Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron, and 70 of the Ziknei Yisrael, and 70 of the elders. Vayiru, and they saw at Elohei Yisrael, the God of Israel, v'tachat raglav, and beneath his feet was kima'aseh livnat hasapir, was like a floor made out of sapphire, and these were the Atzile b'nei Yisrael, but to the nobles of the people of Israel, lo shalach yado, those that had seen this vision, God did not punish them. Vayachazu et Elohim, and they looked at God, vayochlu vayishtu, and they ate and they drank. What is going on over here? I'm gonna skip the questions on it. I'm just leaving that out there. And again, we're gonna let, you can imagine yourself what my questions would have been, and we're gonna let Maimonides get there. And now I'm turning to Leviticus 10, 1 and 2, the story of Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron. Vayikru v'nei Aaron, Nadav and Avihu, the sons of Aaron each one took their incense pan. Vayakrivu lifnei Adonai, and they brought before God eish zara, a foreign flame, asher lo tzivo, some that God did not command them to take. But they'd say eish milifnei Adonai vatuchal otam, and a flame came out from God and destroyed them by a musa, and they died. And I think I have one more verse to bring, and that, well, actually more than one, two more. This next one is from Numbers 12, verse 8. One second. I'm sorry, Numbers 11, verse 1, where it's the time of Taveira, where that people were complaining, and a flame came out from God and destroyed the people. It's very unclear there what the people exactly were being punished for. I'm not going to go into that. Let me just leave that aside for a second, but I'll get back to it when Maimonides talks about it. And then this last one, and this is interesting, this is in Numbers, that's Bamidbar 12, where verse 8, where God says about Moshe, or God says about Moses the following. Vayomer, Shimun advarai, listen to my words. Im nevi achem Adonai b'mara elav esvada. If God is telling us that in the future, if I ever appear as a prophecy, I will appear in a vision. B'chalom adaber bo, I will speak to him in a dream. Lo chein avdi Moshe, but this is not how it is with my servant Moses, Moshe. B'chol beisi nemanu, from all the people in my house, he is the most trustworthy. And listen to this verse. Pe el pe adaber bo, mouth to mouth, I will speak to Moshe. Umar v'lo b'chidos, I will speak to him in a direct vision, not in riddles. V'tumunat Adonai yabit, and he will look directly at the timunat, the shape, the form of God. Umadu, and so on. Now, this seems to contradict some of the things that Maimonides has already taught us. God doesn't have a shape or a form. What does it mean that Moses is going to see God? What does it mean that mouth to mouth God speaks to him if the whole concept of a mouth doesn't exist by God? So I laid out all these questions, and we're going to now learn how Maimonides is going to deal with these questions and what exactly all this means. I guess I could open the floor for a minute and see if anyone could take a guess at general approaches. Do I have anyone who wants to offer a suggestion, a potential suggestion? If I have no one, I'll just keep going. Okay? All right.
Don't they usually say that the Torah speaks in the language of man, so that this is maybe trying not to communicate philosophical truths, but trying just to communicate, well, I guess a superficial understanding.
Yeah, and that's definitely going to be part of Maimonides' answer. When you say the Torah speaks in the language of man, Maimonides was the one who coined that term in that context. The Talmud uses the term, the Torah speaks in the language of man, but it's usually referring to completely different context. It's referring to when people say like a double language, that you can't infer anything from the extra word because it's just speaking in common idiom. Maimonides is the one that uses it for exactly this context, that that sometimes the Torah speaks in a way that we can grasp, have an understanding, because to describe God in ways that are true would be completely beyond our comprehension. But yeah, that's definitely part of it. Anyone else want to? That's going to be definitely part of the answer. Anyone else want to say something about how Rambam's probably going to approach this, or what you think? And if I don't have takers,
Well, I guess one thing, it's just obvious. It's not going to be literally.
absolutely, definitely not. Right. But he's gonna first lay down the he's in the same way that he did when we talked about a form and shape, right? And when he talked about knowledge of good and bad, the concepts that we dealt with in previous classes. In chapter 3 and 4, he's going to analyze some terms, and he's going to prove to us what the terms mean. So I'm going to move through them a little quickly. Just give me 1 second. Okay, I'm going to move through them a little quickly, chapter 3 and 4, because the meat is in chapter 5. But 3 and 4 is important for the setup. So first, let's do chapter 3. And I'll be reading from the Pines version, or more likely even from the Hebrew Kapach. But so many people think that he's going to say that he's going to analyze in chapter 3, he's going to analyze two terms, timunah and tavnit. And for those that are familiar with Hebrew, those terms are often interchangeable. A timunah would mean, a form, a shape, an image, a picture, right? In modern Hebrew, it takes more of a word of a picture, like a photograph, and a tavnit, meaning a shape, a form, they're kind of interchangeable. But Maimonides says they're not interchangeable at all. And especially if you look at the root of each word. So it is thought, I'm reading from Pines, that in the Hebrew language, the meanings of the word figure and shape, timunah and tavnit, are identical. This is not the case. Tavnit derives from the verb bano, beis nun he, to build. And it signifies the build and aspect of the thing. I mean to say its shape. For instance, is it a square, a circle, a triangle, or some other shape? Accordingly, when it says, right, Kitavnitam asher atamar ebhar, tavnit kol kelav, tavnit hamishkan, the tavnit of how is the tabernacle built, right? Each thing, God says, the way I showed you how to build that article, that item of the tabernacle, the tavnit kol sipar had the shape of a bird, the tavnit yad, the shape of a hand, tavnit ha'ulam, the shape of the entry of the ulam, of the entryway of the room, of the entryway to the tabernacle. Kol eila tachnit. These are actual plans, physical measurements, dimensions. That's what tavnit means. Rambam says, I guarantee you, if you look through the entire Torah, you will not find the verb tavnit in reference to God. You can test him on it, check it out. I don't know of anyone that's found him to be wrong on this one. So aval timunah, but the word timunah, which we think means the same thing and could translate the same way, is actually something else. Hushem hanemar al shlosha inyanim both in the sukkah. That word is one of those terms that's amphibolous, meaning it has several meanings, right? It is something which can be said, right, that you can apprehend, right, outside of your brain. In other words, you can feel the shape. In other words, very similar to the first word, tavnit. So when you make a graven image, the figure of any, and so on, a sonal figure. But it is also used to designate the imaginary form of an individual object existing in the imagination after the object of which it is, the form is no longer manifest to the senses. It's also something that you remember. It's an image in your mind. You see something, you see a mountain, and then you go home and you see the timunah of the mountain in your mind. You see the image of it, right? So it's not something real. It's not something you can actually measure anymore, but it is an image that you have in your mind. Thus, it says, in thoughts from the visions of the night, and so on. The conclusion of the dictum being, it stood still, but I could not discern the appearance thereof. A figure was before mine eyes, right? And so that was referring to it's an image in a person's mind. Okay, so that is, and it is also something that one imagines completely in their mind, right? The term is also used, this is the third thing, to designate the true notion grasped by the intellect. It is also a picture. When you say something, I'm forming a picture in my mind. You're trying to understand something, and you form an image in your mind to understand that concept, that idea. So it can either actually mean the form of a physical thing like tavnit. It could mean a memory, or it could mean something that's completely intellectual, completely lacks any physical anything. It's an image you have in your mind, an image of a picture, of a situation, of an idea, of a concept, but something that can't be measured and can't be built. Thus it says, Utmunat Hashem Yabit. And that's one of the verses that I quoted, that when Moses saw a timunah of God, what he saw was something completely conceptual with no physical anything at all. We're going to get back to that verse again, but just hold that in your mind. So number one, he lays out and he gave us plenty of proofs for each one, the difference between a tavnit and a timunah, and telling you that therefore, when the word timunah is used, don't think it means an actual image. And I prove to you, Rambam is saying, that it could mean something that's totally conceptual, totally intellectual, and it's not. Okay, now, in chapter 4, there's something else important for him to lay down in order to give us the idea that he's trying to get at. And that is, there's 3 words that commonly are used in the Torah to refer to sight, to visual, to seeing something, right? And those 3 words are ra'ah, right? Lirot, right? Lahabit, right? To, all right? And lachazot, okay? Each one is, I mean, in the Pines he translates to see, to look at, to vision. What's the difference between those? Like, what does one mean and not the other? So all 3 are used in when they're referring to seeing something with the eyes. But all 3 are also used in a different context completely that has nothing to do with seeing with the eyes, but I see, such as I understand, I comprehend, I get it, right? All 3 of those terms can be used that, and then he brings examples for each and every one. I'm going to skip the examples just for the sake of time, but you can see in there how he brings all this refers to intellectual apprehension and in no way to the eye seeing. And it's obvious when you see the verses that clearly when it uses the word see, it doesn't mean that. In the same way that when it says lirot, it also often means to the person's mind and something you conceptualize. And the same thing in lachazot, right? Also, the term lachazot, he brings from a verse from a book of Micah 4. Let me see that one in a second. Also, lachazot b'noam Hashem, we're familiar with, right? To see the sweetness of God from Psalms, for the words of David. So these are all proofs that those 3 terms don't necessarily mean. And I just went through chapter 4 really quickly. So now we're getting to chapter 5, where he's going to put down his understanding of everything, of all of the questions I just put out. And I think you're starting to get an idea of where he's going to go with this, but let's let the Rambam do it for us. So just remember that a timunah, the word tavnit, is never used in reference to God, because tavnit only means physical dimensions. And therefore, the Torah specifically chooses the word timunah to describe a vision of God, because it wants to emphasize not just that you can interpret non-literally, but the Torah deliberately chose the Hebrew term for a intellectual image, timunah, because it wanted to point out to us that it's only talking about an intellectual image, okay? And when it says that someone saw God, or someone saw an image that represented God, what it means is that he comprehended it, that he, in his intellect, he got it, he understood it, he had a comprehension, he achieved a level of knowledge. Now, so the Rambam starts in 5, a little quote from Aristotle, and without quoting him, if you see in Pines, he gives the note exactly in which book of Aristotle this is coming from. But essentially, Aristotle was answering some people that were kind of poking fun or criticizing him, saying, "Who are you? You have all these lofty ideas. Come back down to earth. Who are you to give us all these, lofty ideas about spiritual matters, about all these things, these highfalutin things, right? And you're just arrogant. You think you're smarter than everybody else, kind of thing." And Aristotle basically said, "I want you to know that and also, like, you know, you're gonna go into these lofty ideas, and you're not worthy of them. Who are you anyway? Right? You're just arrogant. And Aristotle answered to these people that were criticizing him by saying, I just want you to know that that don't think that I'm going into ideas that are too lofty for me, too high for me, that I'm not worthy of understanding these spiritual concepts. I'm doing this because I'm honestly searching for the truth, and I've done the work necessary, and the research necessary, and the work on myself necessary to attain that achievement. So I'm just reading in the Rambam's words, when the chief of philosophers, when Rambam uses that term, he's referring to Aristotle, when he began to investigate very obscure matters and to attempt a proof concerning them, he excused himself by making a statement, the meaning of which was as follows. And the Rambam paraphrases Aristotle's statement. A student of his books should not, because of the subject of these researches, ascribe to him effrontery, temerity, and an excess of haste to speak of matters of which he had no knowledge, but rather he should ascribe to him the desire and the endeavor to acquire and achieve true beliefs to the extent in which this is in the power of man. In the same way, Maimonides says, when we approach spiritual ideas of God, right, man should not hasten too much to accede to this great and sublime matter at the first try. Don't think that you can sit and say, you know, without having worked on yourself, that you could see God, I know God, I feel God, or anything like that, without having done the following, and pay attention to these things, made his soul undergo training in the sciences and the different kinds of knowledge, to study, to learn, to know, to read, right? Having truly improved his character, and this is crucial according to Maimonides. If you're not a good person, you can't achieve knowledge of God. You can't do an honest search for God. And having extinguished the desires and cravings engendered in him by his imagination, and gotten rid of all of your personal motives in trying to achieve God. Your personal motives, you're trying to achieve wealth, you're trying to achieve health, you're trying to achieve satisfaction, whatever it is that you're trying to achieve, you got to get rid of that stuff if you're going to search for God. So number one, you have to be educated, you have to be honest, and you have to be selfless and humble. Those are the key things that are necessary in order to search for God. When, however, he has achieved and acquired knowledge of true and certain premises, and has achieved knowledge of the rules of logic and inference, and of the ways of preserving himself from the errors of the mind. In other words, you're not going to let your mind go after your own desires, then you can engage in the investigation of this subject. Now that the Maimonides lays that down for us, now he says, when doing this, he should not make categoric affirmations in favor of the first opinion that occurs to him. He shouldn't say, oh, every time he thinks of an idea, I think that this is the right idea, and should not from the outset strain and impel his thoughts towards the apprehension of the deity. Don't start thinking, God, I'm gonna achieve knowledge of God, I'm gonna get it, but rather he should feel awe and refrain and hold back until he gradually elevates himself. Be patient. It takes time, it takes work, and you'll get there. Now, it is in this sense that it is said, Moses, in the beginning of his career, the moment he knew he was encountering God at the bush, and Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look upon God. What does it mean he was afraid to look? Remember, Maimonides translated what look means for us. It doesn't mean, yes, he saw the image before, but now he was afraid to look upon that image, meaning he realized that he was encountering something sublime and something beyond his comprehension, and he knew that he needed to take his time to get there. If anything characterizes the encounter between Moshe and God at the burning bush, it's the humility of Moshe. It's the humility of Moses standing there. And with that humility, Moshe was able to realize, I'm not yet ready to look upon and comprehend the power and the greatness and the of who and what God really truly is. This being an additional meaning of the verse over and above its external meaning. Yes, does it mean that he looked away? It does mean that physically he looked away, but that's not the point, Rambam says. This is beyond that physical meaning, right? Because of his being afraid to look upon the light manifests himself. And not that the deity who is greatly exalted above every deficiency can be apprehended by the eyes. It doesn't mean that he was actually could have looked at God himself and now he's turning away. It doesn't mean that at all. So you can see right away how Rambam deals with that. Moses, peace be upon him, was commended for this. And God and Moshe, he was rewarded for this. God saw this as a positive attribute, that Moshe was so humble that he recognized he's not ready for that. So therefore, that is why it says later in the verse that we quoted, Tumnat Hashem Yabit, that Moshe eventually later in his life was able to look upon that image, meaning he was able to comprehend. Moshe came to an understanding of the deity and the understanding of God at a higher level than anyone else in history. And that's what it means with Tumnat Hashem Yabit. He started off his career, right, that he did not want to look upon God, and by the end of his career, he had achieved that level where he was able to look upon, meaning understand the nature of God. And he brings from, it's a Gemara, in the Talmud in Brachot says that the sages do respond. They explain it this way, that Tumnat Hashem Yabit was a reward for Ki Yorei Mehabit Elokim. Now, however, remember that story where the noblemen of Israel were looked upon and gazed upon God, and they saw Kimasei Livnatas appeared. They saw at God's feet, whatever that means, a floor made of sapphire. And then Vayochlu Vayishtu, they ate and they drank. What was going on over there? What was it? So, and I'm going to say this outside, and then I'll read it in the Pines. What the Rambam looks at this is very different from the way it seems to be. On the surface, it seems like they're having this incredible lofty vision of God, that they see God as some kind of image and the sapphire, and you have all kinds of grandiose spiritual images. According to the Rambam, these Atzilei B'nai Israel, these noblemen of Israel, were doing the opposite of Moshe. They were arrogant. They thought that by looking and staring and by whatever speculations they were doing, they would be able to achieve a vision of God and an understanding of God without being humble, without negating their personal desires and negating their personal needs and negating their own, what they were trying to get for their own physical bodies, right? They thought they can take a shortcut. So therefore, when it says that they saw something, when it describes what they saw, that's a criticism. That's saying they didn't see anything real. Had they truly apprehended God, there would have been no vision. There would have been no feet. There would have been no sapphire. There would have been no glowing stones. None of this grand stuff would they have seen, because God doesn't have that. In other words, this is a very, very flawed vision. It might sound grand to us, a floor made out of sapphire. We can imagine a Disney palace or whatever it is we're imagining. But the truth is, the Rambam's saying, is that was a criticism. They saw that because it was flawed. It was flawed. Why? Because Vayochlu Vayishtu, what did they do? They ate and they drank. In other words, they were doing it for their own good and not because they truly wanted to do the work necessary to comprehend God. And therefore, I'm going to read it in the words of Rambam. The nobles of the children of Israel, on the other hand, were over hasty. They strained their thoughts and they achieved apprehension, but only an imperfect one. Hence, it is said they saw the God of Israel and there was under his feet and so on. And not merely they saw the God of Israel. When it talks about Moshe, it says he saw, right? God speaks to him directly, right? He saw Tumnat Hashem. He saw the image of God, but it doesn't describe it. It doesn't say anything about it. It just says the image, because you can't describe it. Once it starts describing it, it's taking away from it. For those words are solely intended to present a criticism of their act of seeing, not to describe the manner of their seeing. It's the purpose of those words is to say, they didn't see nothing real. They saw an image that they could describe in human terms. Therefore, it was flawed. It was not a real image of anything. Thus, they were solely blamed for the form that their apprehension took, in as much as corporeality entered into some extent. The fact that some level of corporeality entered this vision, that shows that the vision wasn't real. This being necessitated by their over hasty rushing forward before they had reached perfection, because they wanted to rush. They wanted to rush forward before they worked on themselves, and they deserved to perish. However, Moshe prayed for them. It's not exactly clear what the Rambam's referring to, which prayer he's referring to. There's different understandings, but I'm not going to get into that. And they were granted a reprieve, but in the end, they were burnt at Tavera, which is in Numbers later on, when there was a plague among the people. Maimonides connects these two, that they were actually punished by being killed in the same way that whereas Nadav and Avihu, those that were also in this vision, they were also there. They were also burnt in the tabernacle, which as is stated in the correct tradition, they were burned for the same reason. And there's a medrash that ties this together. Maimonides is bringing this from a medrash Tanchuma of the rabbis that ties together the sin of them seeing God and also the sin of them bringing the foreign flame before God in the tabernacle, which made them to be deserving of death. Now the Rambam says these men did achieve a significantly high level of apprehension, probably more than many of us would, but not high enough because their own selfishness stood in the way. This having happened to these men, it behooves us all the more as being inferior to them, and it behooves those that are inferior to us to aim and engage in perfecting our knowledge of preparatory matters and achieving those premises that purify apprehension of a taint, which is error, right? So the bottom line is, make sure if you want to learn about God, you need to get rid of your selfishness first. So if you're going to think, you're going to see God because you're going to imagine that he's going to save you by giving you food, by giving you money, by giving you whatever it is that you're looking for God for selfish reasons, then the God that you're going to apprehend, the God that's going to come to you, supposedly, is not the real one. It's the fake one. It's the corporeal one. It's the God that has this human image that you think of as this nice man who's going to give you what you want for when you ask for it. But if you take your selflessness out of it, then you realize that God is so far, it's so much of a different concept that when we do conceive of God, we see something completely different. We see something that has nothing to do with our own personal selfish desires. And which therefore he says, and that was why they were prescripted. They weren't supposed to go to the Har Sinai, to the mountain Sinai, right? And the reason for that is because you know, and where it says, and the Kohanim themselves who approach God, they should make themselves holy first, right? Separate them first, work on yourselves first before you approach the mountain, because if you approach the mountain too fast, you'll be deserving of death because you're going to be searching for God in the wrong way, in the wrong places. So now he's going to say, I shall now go back in order to complete what we began to explain. And I shall say, because of the hindrances that were a stumbling block to the nobles of the children of Israel in their apprehension, their actions were troubled, right? Because they held themselves back with selfish desires, that's why their apprehension was corrupted. And that's why it says, and they went and they ate and drank. And therefore, again, the same thing with the stones. Again, that I made that point already. So now I'm just going to finish this chapter. Our whole purpose was to show that whenever the words seeing, vision, or looking occur in this sense, what it means is intellectual apprehension. It does not mean the eyesight. And then the Rambam ends with one interesting fact. If it so happens, I'll paraphrase it for myself before we complete this. If it so happens that someone were to read this chapter and think that what they saw was some sort of celestial creation, an angel of some sort, as long as they don't attribute it to seeing God himself, not so terrible if somebody misinterprets this chapter. If you read it and think that the people actually saw, feet with the sapphire floor, all right, it's not the end of the world, as long as they don't actually attribute corporeality to God himself. Even though the Rama made it clear to us that that's not true, that you don't see any of these things. But so now we know how a rationalist sees God and how Maimonides interprets these passages in the Torah. That's what I wanted to make sure we covered tonight. And now I'm going to open the floor for discussion.
To what degree, Shaul, was this a polemic against Christianity?
I think that a lot of this is a significant polemic against Christianity, because anything that tries to make an image that could somehow in any way, shape, or form be related to God is utterly rejected by the Rambam, like so vociferously and so clearly that it's Rambam's opinion about Christianity is well known. And he makes it clear in various places we'll get to, but it wasn't positive at all. And the attempt to make some kind of image, something representative of God, no matter how you twist it, the Rambam really didn't like that, as you can see. And he's going to make it, but I don't think this is a polemic. I think this is the Rambam trying to explain the Torah. If there was no such thing as Christianity, he probably would have said the same thing. But this is definitely part of it. This is, we'll see. We'll see in some places how you're. The Rambam was a lot more fond of Islam than Christianity.
So I'm not a Rambam scholar, but I thought I had read that Rambam was the one who said that Christianity basically spread Torah throughout the world.
That is true.
Okay.
He did. He said Christianity and Islam are steps that the world is taking in the right direction. And however, the Rambam was also felt that Christianity is idolatry, and he writes that explicitly, and he writes that Islam is not idolatry. And the among the Jewish scholars today, those who attack Christianity the most strongly almost always base themselves on the Rambam. It's just the way it was. Maybe, I mean, Rambam lived in a mostly Islamic world,
Right.
so he was biased. Maybe if he was exposed to other Christians, he might have felt differently. Who knows? But there's no way to know. But he did. You're right. He did feel that Christianity introduced the world to concepts of monotheism and introduced the world to the Torah and as the Word of God and so on. Ideas that are important that did bring the world a step closer to where it's supposed to be.
And also spread the ethical code of Judaism. Not the
Yes.
halakha, but the ethical code of Judaism, right?
Yeah.
Earlier in your talk, you referred to rationality. And can you state which how to define rationality? What did Maimonides think were subjects that could be limited to rational conversation, and which did he not think?
Well, the main difference between a rationalist viewpoint and a mystical viewpoint is that a rationalist generally tends to explain things as scientifically as possible. In other words, doesn't rely on spiritual explanations for physical phenomena. So, and Maimonides tries to do that all the time. That's like, if I had to melt it down to just the most, and to try, and to explain things in as much logically, philosophically, scientifically sound way as possible.
But does that exclude like things like heaven and hell and God?
It doesn't exclude God, because Maimonides is explaining to us God from a rationalist perspective, right? But in heaven and hell, maybe we could devote a whole subject to what Maimonides believed about heaven and hell. But that's a good topic.
Okay, so God is within the realm of rational understanding. Is that what you?
Right? Yes, absolutely, 100%. Yes. Right. God is not. Maimonides strongly believed that we don't accept God on blind faith. We accept God because it makes sense and it's true, and philosophically could be understood and proven.
But he also thought that comprehension of God was beyond the rational mind.
Actual comprehension is this. The Rama is going to do. There's going to be a lot of this specific issue in the guide that we're going to study together. Maimonides was famous for describing God by negative attributes. It was taken up by many theologians after Maimonides, but he was most famous for putting that idea. In other words, we can't comprehend God by describing him positively, right? But the best way to comprehend God is by describing what he's not. And the more you describe what he's not, the closer and closer and closer you get to a comprehension of what he is. And we will get there. It might be a few more months, but we will get there. Maimonides is going to explain that very clearly, how that works. And he's going to explain it through his own parables and ideas of comprehending God through negative attributes. But that's it. These are some of the major ideas that he put forward.
I have another question. This
Sure,
may
go ahead.
be, when there's a quote from Exodus.
Yes.
It says, and let the priests also, which come near to the Lord, sanctify themselves, lest the Lord break forth upon them. That's in the
Exodus 19, right?
Yes,
Okay.
verse 22. Can you clarify what is meant by how they sanctified themselves? Is this just a physical action?
Yeah, so they sanctified themselves. Well, one of the things that's clear we know was to separate themselves from their wives, not to involve themselves in physical pleasures like that, and to immerse in a mikvah, and whether I don't to some level fasting, praying, these kind of things to purify themselves so that they're to get rid of their personal physical desires.
Okay. So it's basically physical activities, not some spiritual
Right. Yes.
action. Okay.
I think I might have lost everyone.
No, you're still here.
Oh, I'm
No?
still there. Okay. All right. Good. I'm sorry. I just my own screen is acting funny, but if I'm still there, I'm still there. Well, any other questions or comments?
Um,
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. My screen just came back on. I apologize. Yes. All right. Well, one of the things that we're going to see this pattern of the Rambam telling us language, telling us words, and then showing how simply translating words properly can make such a difference into how you interpret a whole story and the meaning of the story. And we'll have some more interesting stuff next time. I might start soon skipping around, but we'll see. I have to look at the upcoming few chapters and decide if I'm going to skip around a little bit.
Is there any chance that you could, I mean, and if you can't, you're being very generous here, but that you could
We need to send.
potentially email to us in advance what we're going to cover?
I could try, but sometimes I don't prepare until like today. Like today, I was thinking about it for the last few days, but I didn't really prepare until today. So I'm not sure if I could promise that I could do that, but I'll try. I mean, my intent is for now to do the next few chapters. He's going to translate some terms, but he's not going to go into the depth of a major issue like he did these last few times with the tree of knowledge and creating God in the image of man, creating man in the image of God, or today's issue. So what I might do next time is, like, next time he talks about Ish and Isha, the terms for man and woman, I might find other places where Rambam talks about the concept and show how I relate the two. Because it's going to take me a little bit of work. I do, if anyone wants the articles that I was referring to, I'll send them to you. I happen to be fortunate that I just happen to get a collection of all these articles, and I'll try to throw at you one a week, because there's so much scholarly work on Maimonides that there's a lot to read. But it might help complement what we discuss here.
Is our ability to text you posted in the chat? Because we can't respond, obviously, to the yeshiva chat, WhatsApp.
I'll put my phone number in a message on the WhatsApp chat, and then you can WhatsApp me to my own phone number after that.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, and then it's easier. WhatsApp is easier because I could send PDFs over WhatsApp too. So and for those that I have at Alabama, I have a text messaging group. If you guys want to join WhatsApp, if you're in it, then tell me. I can put you into that group too. So we'll all be together. Okay.
Thank you
I guess
so much.
all right, we're gonna call it a night.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank you very much.
Thank
And
you.
oh wait, one more thing. This is next Wednesday. We're not having a class because of Purim. The holiday of Purim is next Wednesday night, so we're skipping next Wednesday. So we're going to meet again in 2 weeks.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
all right.
And those, and that, wait, if I may, and those of you
Yes.
who are in the Washington area, I am sponsoring at the yeshiva of Purim Seuda. There will be really good whiskey and deli sandwiches from 3 to like 5:45, and we're gonna have singing from like 5:15 to 5:45. So
All right, sounds like
I wish
fun.
I was there.
what?
Sounds fun.
Mm.
Great. Thanks, Dan.
Sure.
All right, be well.
Bye. Thank you.